Hello, hello, and we're back for another video. In the previous video, we discussed learning, and we ended up with learning is a state. It's not really an action that you do, it's a state that you're in as you are trying to fulfill some action. It's the gap between where you are right now without that action taken, and by the end of it, after the action is done. Today, or this video, is about the internal monologue activates and awaits our response. If we ignore it, it plays based it plays based on itself. So let me repeat. The internal monologue activates and awaits our response. If we ignore it, then it plays based on itself. Okay, so the plays based on itself, I'm probably reflecting on that back and forth that happens in your head. So the internal monologue activates and awaits our response. That is pointing to the fact that we're not really thinking. We don't really think. Our mind does its thing. What we are is the intention behind it. And that's where you kind of like, if somebody says something off, instantly you feel, you have a feeling, you have a response to that or a reaction to that. A reaction is a lot more like visual, but a response is a lot more kind of like emotional slash mental. And again, like if I just say poop, the first thing you see in your head is the last poop you saw, or something, or some of you might actually have a reaction going, ugh, or something like this. That's what I mean. The mind does its own thing, and that's a primitive thing. It's simple, right? Because like ultimately, what I mentioned a word that kind of represents something across cultures, and it's easier for the mind to kind of give you a response. And then depending on your character, if your character's like poop, some people would laugh when you say poop, and some people would feel disgusted when you say poop. But then why would we limit the mind to that? What if like a lot of things have been happening the past month, and then suddenly you're left with a train of thought that you are not really like aware of? And so what happens is your mind has been doing its thing, and then you kind of like are a bit aggressive and like you're fussy or you're agitated or something like this, and you're looking around at people and you're like you're acting differently. So your mind kind of did its thing, and in a way you kind of ignored the things that it should have showed you. Maybe it showed you suddenly, maybe they weren't an issue until they became one. We all grow through that stuff. We all The biggest thing about society is the fact that it detaches us from ourselves because we pretend a lot. And then what ends up happening is we kind of like are convinced with the play that we're playing. So when the time comes for us to mature, what we're effectively doing is kind of like getting rid of that conditioning by understanding ourselves better. So I'm consciously acting or I am unconsciously acting. If I'm unconsciously acting, that probably means I believe I am the hero of the story or the villain or the sad person or whatever or the NPC, whatever it is. So the mind will do its thing until you're kind of like giving it some attention. And when you're giving it attention, I feel like this is where basically the the internal monologue activates and awaits our response. Our response is based on the attention itself. Because what we're doing is we go like, oh, this is happening. Like, hey, what's going on? And then when that happens, suddenly the brain, the mind has a chance to actually go back and forth with something beyond itself. And so, and again, like it's just a bunch of information. Who you are is just the intention behind all of this facade. Who you are is truly just like the I versus the me and the myself. Me is what you're looking at right now. It's thought. Myself is basically in between my mind and me. Because my mind is basically a reflection of reality, while me, I'm a reflection of the world. But in a way as well, me is a reflection of myself, because like it's a back and forth between me and the world, and it's a back and forth between me and myself. But also, like my mind is a reflection of my reality, but it's also a reflection of myself because like I'm creating a world in my head or I'm seeing the world in my head, or interacting with the world in my head. So naturally, internal monologue starts with the mind, and then what happens is basically it's triggers that we find all around us that basically reflect on our thought process. And when that happens, we basically are something happens that activates a certain process based on experience, based on previous habits, based on feelings, based on situations. Who the fuck knows, man, right? There's literally a whole lot that we absorb over and over again. And that's why conditioning, the repetition, like George Bush kind of like says it beautifully in one of his speeches. Like he was literally telling everyone how he brainwashes them by repeating the same thing over and over again until everyone kind of like believes it to be the truth. So if we ignore it, then basically, if we ignore that mind's monologue, I'm specifically saying the monologue because a monologue is normally based on you, and mostly you notice it if you're not really like paying attention. You notice it when you're not feeling too well, and not necessarily not feeling too well sick, but not feeling too well as in frustrated, all that kind of shit. It's a weird state where you kind of realize your mind is doing its thing, and you go like, "Shit, man, what's going on? Why am I like in that mood?" And like, when you start asking those questions, then your mind responds. I love it. And then basically the monologue kind of shifts and starts pointing at things, and you go like, "But this is not really like what I would want out of things." It's like, yeah, but like it fucking still pisses me off. So you kind of like go back and forth, and eventually you reflect on. Well, I think that's the process of reflection. No, yeah, that's the process of reflection. I think the process of reflection and the process of meditation are not the same. When you're reflecting on something, is you're going back and forth with it until finally it kind of processes in a way that best suits you, or doesn't, right? Because I've seen people get madder and madder and madder the more they think about something, but that's not them reflecting on it. That's them literally like going back to that same space and coming back with the same emotion. They're not really questioning anything about it. But the art of meditation is just kind of like observing your thoughts and letting them be. And ultimately, it's just like you kind of like realizing that you're not really involved in them, which we always try to do, right? Because we always try to look at to kind of be like to redesign the story. And if it's not a redesign that you can accept or your mind can accept because it doesn't naturally fit, then you're probably going to get through anxiety a bit and then eventually kind of like realize that what you're trying to do is force something and then take a step back and. It's a bit fantastic to consider these things always, because ultimately they all start from you, right? And then they always basically return to you. And that's the way of the world. Because ultimately, whatever I intend, the self basically takes it and expresses it. It's the engine of expression, and it's expressed both to me and to my mind. And that split basically changes my reality and the world. And then we get feedback. And sometimes the feedback from the world is brutal, and sometimes the feedback from the mind is brutal. So the best we could do is respond to it. Because ultimately, anytime it's triggered for a reason. And our response makes us understand where it's coming from, and if anything, why it's actually moving. So from there, we're able to be involved in the process instead of allowing the mind to kind of just like bounce back any information it has, which eventually like leads to the same result that it did before. Correct? If you're, I think, yeah, Einstein said that. If you're, insanity is doing something over and over again and expecting a different result. So the mind literally just kind of goes back through memory and goes back through all the times that we handled something and all the information we had and will probably respond in a way that it knows how. And then when we get involved, we kind of activate that consciousness. that allows us to kind of like expand given new information and given new material. And it allows our train of thought to go back and forth and just kind of like feed feed it some new energy. I don't know if it's this video that I talked about cosmic energy or the one before that. But that energy basically that your intention is providing because you're actually responding. Like that's you going like I acknowledge it. And that's enough of a response. Regardless of how you feel, just acknowledging the monologue allows it to kind of like stop going in a loop and actually go somewhere where it can like change the outcome, change the outlook. That's the best we could do, man. Is and I feel like it's just the same with friends, right? Like when a friend of yours is actually frustrated, the last thing they want is for you to speak. They just want you to be there. And you being there is that response. Like I'm responding to your frustrations. You being there and actually like speaking or giving advice, you're kind of not responding, you're involving yourself. So it's no longer about them, it's about you. And for, our mind is selfish enough to be that way, right? Because ultimately it wants to be heard. And anytime like you don't hear it, more and more thoughts kind of like pile up. If you don't hear it, the thoughts don't go anywhere. They just stick and then they grow and expand and start. The way I imagine it is basically every thought is kind of like bouncing and moving in your head. And if you don't give it its attention, it starts going faster and faster and faster and faster. And eventually you're like, yeah, what do you want from me? And then kind of let it all out. I think that's also where talking kind of like when you're anxious and you're talking to somebody and you're kind of laying it out, kind of like that, oof, I feel better simply because it's got out. Respond, babies. Respond to your thoughts, to your monologue. Acknowledge their existence. And they will be set free and you will be free of them as well. I love you guys. It's a video. Woo!